Captain Bryn Folly had a theory that everything in the universe was either trying to break down, blow up, or bore you to death. The Resolute, the fortress ship he called home, was a prime example of all three. Standing on the bridge, he stared at the cracked display screens, their flickering images barely coherent thanks to 1,000 patch jobs. If duct tape was an engineering solution, then duct tape and hope were all that kept the Resolute from falling apart at the seams. "Captain, we got a situation," said Chief Engineer Jackson Thorne, striding up with a datapad in hand. Thorne wasn't much to look at, mostly because he looked like he'd been assembled from spare parts found in a junkyard. He was the kind of guy who seemed to attract trouble, and given their current predicament, trouble was the last thing they needed. "Sensors are picking up activity in the vicinity of Sector 7G. Bryn raised an eyebrow, which was about all the enthusiasm he could muster. "Activity? You mean like in-laws visiting, or more like an alien horde looking to blow us out of the sky?" Jackson gave a lopsided grin, the kind that suggested he was used to dodging pots and pans in a domestic dispute. "I'm opting for the latter. Looks like we're about to be introduced to some uninvited guests." "Fantastic," Bryn said, feigning excitement. I was getting bored. He'd have sighed dramatically if he thought it would make a difference to the universe at large. But the universe didn't give a rat's ass. It was too busy collapsing in on itself. "Just what we need," Bryn continued. "A bunch of overgrown space bugs trying to chew through our hull." The Resolute was what the brass back at HQ called a fortress ship. It was supposed to be a floating bastion of human ingenuity and defiance. In reality, it was an old clunker barely held together by spit and prayer. Bryn often joked that if you wanted to see human perseverance, just take a look at the Resolute's maintenance log. It was a miracle of bureaucratic fiction. "Well, at least we know they won't be coming for our tech," Jackson said with a dry chuckle. "Might be the only thing holding us together is the fact that no one considers it worth stealing." "Ain't that the truth?" Bryn replied. "What's the status of the ship?" Jackson tapped his datapad like it owed him money. "She's seen better days, but then so have all of us. Fuel reserves are low, power cores are kind of like our mood, fluctuating wildly, and life support's on its last legs. So, business as usual, pretty much." Bryn looked around the bridge, taking in the worn faces of his crew. They were a ragtag bunch, desperate, disheveled, and definitely not the poster children for any recruitment campaign. But they were his crew, and they were damn good at what they did. Which was usually keeping the Resolute from becoming a floating metal coffin. "All right, people," Bryn called out, clapping his hands with the vigor of a man trying to wake up a hibernating bear. "We've got company on the way. I want everyone at battle stations. Let's show these aliens why they shouldn't mess with a bunch of humans who have nothing left to lose." The crew grumbled their assent, moving to their positions with the enthusiasm of condemned prisoners heading for the gallows, which, in a way, wasn't too far from the truth. "Jackson, get down to engineering," Bryn ordered. "I want every bolt and circuit ready for what's coming." "Got it, Cap," Jackson replied, already heading out the door. "Let's see if we can't keep this old girl flying one more time." Alone, Bryn sank into the captain's chair, which felt like it had been upholstered with rocks. He flipped a switch, bringing up the comms system. "Hey, folks. This is your friendly neighborhood captain speaking. We're about to have a bit of a disagreement with some neighbors, so buckle up and try not to die. That is all." He cut the line, rubbing his temples. A headache was forming, like tiny aliens were trying to claw their way out of his skull. Probably the only aliens he'd have any control over today. "Captain," came a voice over the intercom. It was Lieutenant Enya Volkov, his second in command. Always dependable, always serious, and always ready to rain on his parade. "What is it, Enya? You should know the alien fleet is broadcasting a message," she said, her tone the auditory equivalent of a funeral dirge. "Let me guess," Bryn said. "They're inviting us over for tea and a friendly chat. More like they're demanding surrender, sir." "Figures," he muttered. "Patch it through. Let's hear what our charming guests have to say." The bridge speakers crackled to life, spitting static like an offended cat. Then came the voice, guttural and laced with malice. "Humans aboard the Resolute. You are surrounded. Surrender now or be obliterated." "Well, they're certainly to the point," Bryn said, mimicking the alien's gravelly tone. "I almost feel insulted by how little they think of us." "Orders, Captain?" Enya asked, her voice tinged with the slightest hint of eagerness. Bryn considered their options, weighing the odds like a gambler with a loaded dice. "Tell them we'll think about it," he finally replied. "Then prepare for evasive maneuvers." "Aye, sir," Enya acknowledged, a ghost of a smile in her voice. Bryn leaned back, staring at the ceiling. It was a patchwork of metal plates, each one a reminder of another day survived. Another day they hadn't been blown to atoms. "You know," he said, half to himself, "if we get out of this alive, I might just retire." "Retire, sir?" Enya asked over the comms, her disbelief as clear as space was vast. "Sure," Bryn replied with a dry laugh. "Buy a nice little plot of land on some forgotten rock and spend my days yelling at the sun." Enya chuckled, a rare sound that was music to his ears. "Sounds like a plan, Captain." "Yeah," Bryn said, closing his eyes and imagining that peaceful life. "Just gotta survive the day first." The Resolute shuddered as the alien ships drew closer, intent on turning them into space junk. But Bryn wasn't worried. Not yet anyway. After all, he'd been in worse situations. He just couldn't quite remember when. "All right, folks," he called out, his voice carrying across the bridge. "Let's show these bastards what humans are made of." As the crew scrambled to their stations, Bryn sat forward, resolute as his ship's namesake. Around him, the Resolute creaked and groaned, but it held together, just like its captain. "For now, at least. Captain, you better come see this." Jackson Thorne's voice crackled through the comms like a drunk uncle at a wedding. Bryn imagined him down in engineering, probably standing knee-deep in wires and oil, looking like a man about to juggle live grenades. Bryn reluctantly peeled himself from the captain's chair, which clung to him like a needy ex. He tapped the comm panel. "On my way, Jackson. Try not to accidentally set the ship on fire before I get there." "Can't make any promises," Jackson replied, and Bryn could almost hear the smirk in his voice. "But I'll do my best to keep the smoke to a minimum." Bryn made his way through the ship's corridors, each step echoing with the creaks and groans of metal that had seen better centuries. The Resolute was a grand old lady in the same way that a collapsed barn was a cozy fixer-upper. But it was home, and you'd be surprised what you'd put up with when you're out of options. He arrived in engineering to find Jackson hunched over a console, furiously swiping at the datapad like a man trying to swat an invisible fly. "What's the crisis this time?" Jackson looked up, his face smeared with grease and resignation. "Our weapon systems are about as effective as throwing harsh language at them. Turrets are down, energy lances are on the fritz, and the missile launchers are out of commission." Bryn blew out a long breath through his nose. "So we're basically defenseless." "Pretty much," Jackson admitted, shrugging with a casualness that suggested they were discussing the weather rather than imminent death. "Great. Just fantastic," Bryn said. "And here I was worried things might actually go right for once." Jackson pulled a face. "On the bright side, our shields are still working. Well, mostly. They're more like a suggestion of protection at this point." "Noted." "And what about supplies? Please tell me we're not about to run out of air or something equally inconvenient." Jackson scratched his chin, his fingers leaving a trail of grease that could probably lubricate the entire ship. "We've got enough rations to last us a few weeks, assuming no one gets trigger-happy with the snack packs. Fuel's running low, though. We might have enough to jump once, but after that we're pretty much on our own. Because it wouldn't be a party without that little detail," Bryn said, shaking his head. "I swear, Jackson, if I survive this, I'm going to start a career in something less stressful, like babysitting rabid space weasels." "Sounds like a plan," Jackson said. "But right now we need a miracle." "Miracles are for people who don't have to scrape together a living in this universe," Bryn replied. "We've got to come up with a plan." The ship shuddered again, a gentle reminder that they were one bad decision away from becoming cosmic dust. Bryn turned to Jackson, his expression grim yet somehow still managing to maintain a hint of humor. Time for a strategy meeting. Get the senior staff together. Let's see if we can't pull a rabbit out of this hat without losing our heads in the process. Jackson nodded, tapping furiously on his datapad. On it, Cap. I'll round them up faster than you can say we're screwed. Faster than a speeding bullet, Bryn muttered as he headed back to the bridge, the weight of impending doom settling comfortably on his shoulders like an old, unwanted coat. The bridge was a flurry of activity. Crew members darted between consoles, their expressions a mix of fear, determination, and just a hint of gallows humor. Bryn appreciated that. If you couldn't laugh in the face of certain death, what was the point? Lieutenant Enya Volkov was overseeing the chaos with the calm detachment of a woman who'd seen it all before and had long since stopped being impressed. She turned as Bryn approached, her eyes sharp as ever. "Captain, the crew's ready for your orders." "Let's assemble in the war room," Bryn said, gesturing for the senior staff to follow him. "We need to figure out how to stop those alien bastards from turning us into interstellar confetti." The war room was a grim little chamber, its walls adorned with mismatched monitors that displayed everything from tactical readouts to what was possibly a soap opera rerun from a century ago. Bryn took his seat at the head of the table, tapping the controls to bring up the holographic projection of the alien fleet. "All right, let's get down to brass tacks," Bryn began, his voice as dry as the Martian desert. "We've got an alien fleet breathing down our necks, weapons that are more temperamental than an artist on a caffeine bender, and enough fuel to jump once. Suggestions?" Chief Tactical Officer Leela Chen leaned forward, her fingers steepled under her chin. "We could try a hit-and run. Use our one jump to get in close, hit them where it hurts, and then pray we can outrun them." Bryn considered it, nodding slowly. "Not bad, but we're gambling with a hand full of nothing. What else?" Jackson, looking like a man who'd just discovered the universe's worst joke, chimed in. "We could try talking to them. Maybe convince them we're not worth the effort. I mean, look at us." He gestured around the room. "We're not exactly prime targets." "Begging them to leave us alone," Bryn said, raising an eyebrow. "I like it, it's got a certain pathetic charm." "Or we could try and make it look like we're a bigger threat than we are," Enya suggested, her gaze fixed on the holographic ships. "Bluff our way through, make them think twice." "Bluffing," Bryn mused, tapping his fingers on the table. "I like it. The trick is not letting them see us sweat. Make them believe we're holding aces instead of deuces." The ship shuddered again, a not-so-subtle reminder that time was ticking. Bryn squared his shoulders, looking each of his officers in the eye. "All right, people, let's take a swing at this. We'll combine all the plans. Hit and run, bluff and talk. Keep them guessing." "Sounds like a plan," Jackson said, flashing a grin. "Equal parts crazy and desperate, just the way we like it." Bryn nodded, feeling a flicker of hope. "Exactly. Let's give them a show they'll never forget." The crew dispersed to their stations, their movements quick and purposeful. Bryn returned to the bridge, feeling the same old resolve settling in. The universe might be out to get them, but they weren't going down without a fight. As the bridge buzzed with activity, Bryn took his place in the captain's chair, feeling the weight of command like an old, familiar friend. He opened the comms, his voice steady despite the chaos. "This is your captain speaking. We've got a fight on our hands, but I believe in each and every one of you. Let's show these aliens what it means to face humans with nothing left to lose." The crew responded with a cheer, their spirits lifted by the sheer audacity of their plan. Bryn switched the comms to the alien frequency, clearing his throat before speaking. "This is Captain Bryn Folly of the Resolute. We may look like a rust bucket, but we're more than capable of ruining your day. You might want to rethink your strategy." Silence followed, stretching long enough for Bryn to wonder if the aliens were laughing at his bluff. But then the comms crackled to life and the guttural voice returned. "Humans, your bravado is noted, but we will not be deterred." "Can't blame me for trying," Bryn said under his breath before switching to the internal comms, addressing Enya. "Ready the jump. Let's see if we can pull this off." "Aye, Captain," Enya replied, her fingers dancing over the controls. "Jump coordinates are set whenever you're ready." Bryn took a deep breath, feeling the anticipation in the air. "On my mark, 3, 2, 1, jump." The Resolute shuddered violently as it leapt through space, the stars blurring into lines before snapping back into focus. Bryn felt his stomach lurch, but he held firm, gripping the armrests as if they were the only things keeping him tethered to reality. They emerged from the jump, the alien fleet looming large on the viewscreen. Bryn didn't hesitate, barking orders with the confidence of a man who'd forgotten what fear felt like. "All weapons, fire at will." "Make him feel it," the ship's system's word to life, unleashing a barrage of firepower that lit up the void. Bryn watched the display, his heart pounding in time with the explosions. "How's it going down there, Jackson?" Jackson's voice came through the comms, tinged with urgency. "Weapons are holding, but I wouldn't bet on them for long." "Keep them guessing, Captain. That's the plan," Bryn replied, glancing at the viewscreen where the alien ships were starting to regroup. "Enya, how are those shields?" "Holding for now," she replied, her expression focused. "But they're taking a beating." Bryn weighed their options, knowing they were running out of time. "Let's give them one more surprise. Jackson, any chance we can overload the energy cores?" "Maybe give them a parting gift." Jackson's laughter was a dark, comforting presence. "It's a risky move, but I like the way you think. I'll see what I can do." "Do it," Bryn said, feeling a surge of adrenaline. "And Jackson, make it count." The Resolute danced through the battlefield, each maneuver precise and calculated. Bryn watched as the alien ship struggled to keep up, the element of surprise giving them a fleeting advantage. He knew it wouldn't last, but there was a certain thrill in the chaos. This was what he lived for, the moment when everything hung in the balance, when the universe seemed to hold its breath. And if they went down, Bryn mused, at least they'd go down fighting. As the ship shuddered and groaned, Bryn felt a strange sense of calm. Whatever happened next, they were in it together, the Resolute and her crew defying the odds one last time. "Let's give him hell," Bryn said, a grin tugging at his lips. "After all, it's not like we have anything better to do." Jackson Thorne stood in the bowels of the Resolute, surrounded by a graveyard of obsolete machinery and forgotten tech. The decommissioned sections of the ship were like an old person's attic, full of junk nobody wanted, but everyone hesitated to throw away. He wiped a smear of grease across his forehead, giving him the appearance of a man who'd lost a fight with an oily octopus. He muttered to himself, the glow of his datapad flickering ominously. Scavenging parts in spaceship hell. Just another day in paradise. Jackson had always thought of himself as a kind of artist, not the kind who painted sunsets or sculpted statues to be admired in galleries. No, he was more the sort of artist who saw beauty in duct tape and jury-rigged miracles. And right now, he needed to find the Mona Lisa of spare parts to keep them from being space dust. "Hey, Jackson," a voice crackled over the comms. It was Bryn, sounding like he was trying to keep his voice light in the middle of a Category 5 panic. "If you find anything labeled Magic Fix-All, grab a couple for me, will you?" Jackson snorted, kicking aside a busted coolant pump. "Sure, Cap. Maybe I'll find a unicorn while I'm at it." But no promises. The line went dead, leaving Jackson to his own thoughts. He wandered through the dimly lit corridors, his footsteps echoing like the universe's version of a laugh track. He eyeballed a dusty crate and pried it open, revealing a tangle of wires and circuits that had definitely seen better days. "Like looking in a mirror," he muttered, digging through the mess. He pulled out an energy capacitor, shaking it like a maraca. "Please don't explode," he sang, setting it aside and diving back in. Meanwhile, back on the bridge, Bryn Folly was doing his best impersonation of a captain who had everything under control. His crew was busy pretending to believe him. He leaned back in his chair, contemplating the ceiling as if it held the answers to all his problems. "Ever thought about a career change, Captain?" Enya's voice broke through his thoughts, the edge of sarcasm unmistakable. Bryn smirked. "Oh yeah, I've got a whole list. Professional sandcastle builder, intergalactic cupcake taster, or maybe a fortune teller. Cause I clearly saw this coming. Enya chuckled, her fingers dancing over her console. If this doesn't work out, I hear babysitting rabid space weasels is a growth industry. Bryn's grin was a half-second away from becoming a full laugh, but he reined it in. I'll put it on the list. Right after we stop the aliens from turning us into Swiss cheese. The bridge crew was tense, but there was an undercurrent of grim determination. They'd been in tight spots before. This was just a particularly unpleasant one. And if Bryn had anything to say about it, they'd pull through with their lives and their sense of humor intact. Keep monitoring those scanners, Bryn ordered, his tone firm. We don't need any surprises right now. Roger that, Captain, Enya replied, her eyes tracking the displays. And if one of those alien probes sneaks up on us, I'll let you know. Bryn nodded, trusting in his crew's competence despite the odds. Thanks, Enya. Last thing we need is an interstellar peeping Tom. Meanwhile, Jackson had managed to gather a respectable pile of parts, each piece a potential solution or disaster waiting to happen. He surveyed his haul with the critical eye of a chef evaluating a mystery basket on a cooking show. All right, let's see if I can whip up something worthy of a Michelin star, he said, cracking his knuckles and setting to work. As he began cobbling components together, his mind drifted to the crew's morale. The old ship was creaky, its corridors filled with whispers of what used to be. Fear was a constant companion, lurking in the shadows, but humor, they had that by the bucket load. It was the only thing keeping them from screaming into the void. Jackson glanced at his comms, contemplating the news he'd have to break to Bryn. Hey, Captain, got an update from the bowels of despair, he said, his voice crackling over the line. Lay it on me, Jackson, Bryn responded, sounding like a man bracing for impact. Well, unless our guests have a penchant for vintage tech, I'm not finding much, Jackson admitted, the humor threaded through his words doing little to mask his frustration. I think the most useful thing I found was a screwdriver with a magnet on the end, perfect for picking up the pieces of our shattered dreams, Bryn quipped, his tone dry. Keep at it. If anyone can turn a pile of junk into a miracle, it's you. Jackson allowed himself a moment of pride before the reality of their situation settled back in. Thanks, Cap. I'll keep digging. He switched off the comms and returned to his makeshift workbench, soldering wires with the precision of a man who had long since accepted that any day could be his last. It was a liberating thought, really. The knowledge that they were all living on borrowed time, so why not make the most of it? Above him, nestled in the heart of the ship, Bryn was doing his best to hold everything together. He paced the bridge like a caged lion, his mind working overtime to keep the crew focused, confident, and not thinking about the fact that they could be molecular confetti in the next 5 minutes. All right, folks, keep your eyes peeled for anything unusual, he said, scanning the room. And by unusual, I don't mean Jackson's taste in music. Hey, Captain, I found something, Enya called out, her voice cutting through the tension like a hot knife through butter. Probe, port side, just outside scanner range. Looks like they're watching us. Bryn's jaw tightened. Well, isn't that just dandy? How's our bluff looking? They're not buying it yet, but they're not shooting either, Enya replied, her fingers flying over the controls. Let's give them something to think about. Bryn nodded, feeling the adrenaline surge through him. Get tactical on the line. I want options and I want them fast. But even as he spoke, the unease in the pit of his stomach twisted, a dark reminder that they were always just one step away from disaster. Sure, they could pretend to be invincible, but the universe had a way of humbling even the cockiest bastards. Jackson's voice cut through the comms again, a lifeline in the chaos. Captain, I might have something. It's not pretty, but I think it'll hold. Good, Bryn replied, a hint of relief threading through his voice. Get it done, Jackson. We need all the luck we can muster. Luck's just bad planning, Jackson muttered, setting to work with renewed vigor. If he could just squeeze a little more life out of the old girl, maybe they could stall the aliens long enough to come up with a real plan. or at least long enough to make a break for it. Bryn watched the display as the probe loomed closer, a silent sentinel picking apart their every move. He hated feeling like a bug under a magnifying glass, but there was something oddly comforting in the fact that they were still alive to feel anything at all. "Keep an eye on it," Bryn ordered, his voice steady. "The moment it does anything stupid, I want to know." Enya nodded, her focus unbreakable. "Don't worry, Captain. If they sneeze in our direction, you'll be the first to know." Bryn allowed himself a small smile, feeling the weight of command settle more comfortably on his shoulders. They were outgunned, outmatched, and out of their depth, but they'd been there before. And damn it, if they were going down, they'd do it with style. Jackson worked feverishly, patching systems together with the grace of a man who regularly danced with death. The ship shuddered beneath his feet, as if reminding him that it had been through worse and survived. "Come on, baby," he whispered, coaxing the ancient technology to life. "Don't let me down now." The lights flickered, but they held, and Jackson allowed himself a triumphant grin. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He tapped his comms, reaching into the silence that connected him to the crew. "Captain, I think I've got us a little more power," he said, his voice tinged with satisfaction. "Not much, but it might be enough to buy us time." "Good work, Jackson," Bryn replied, genuine gratitude in his voice. "I knew I could count on you." Jackson felt a swell of pride at the words, knowing that whatever happened next, he'd done his part. He glanced at the pile of parts left unsorted, wondering if there was more he could do, but knowing he'd already worked a minor miracle. Back on the bridge, Bryn leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the displays. The probe was still out there, a reminder of the danger lurking just beyond their reach. "Keep running scans," he ordered, his voice calm but insistent. "Maybe we'll get lucky and find a weakness." Enya nodded, her fingers dancing over the controls. "Copy that, Captain. I'll keep them guessing." Bryn settled back in his chair, feeling the hum of the ship beneath him. It was a tenuous piece, but it was theirs, and they'd hold onto it as long as they could. For now, they were still in the fight, and as long as they drew breath, they'd keep swinging. It was the human way, stubborn, relentless, and just a little bit insane. "Let's give him hell, folks," Bryn said quietly, the words a promise to himself and his crew. "We've got nothing to lose." And with that, the Resolute continued her dance among the stars, a battered but unbowed testament to human tenacity in the face of certain doom. The Resolute was a testament to human ingenuity, if ingenuity was measured in missed deadlines and patchwork fixes. Bryn Folly leaned back in his chair, surveying the bridge as if it might suddenly burst into song and dance its way into solving all their problems. "Ever think we're just one bad day away from being a cautionary tale?" he quipped, fully aware that every crew member was pretending not to notice him, pretending to have everything under control. "More like one bad Ior," replied Enya, the ship's navigator/sarcasm connoisseur. Her fingers continued to tap across the console in a desperate dance to keep their systems from staging a coup. "Though I hear the afterlife has a hell of a retirement plan." "Sign me up," Bryn answered with a grin sharper than a knife in a back alley. In the universe's grand game of chicken, they were the ones with the rusted tricycle and a prayer. Just then, Jackson's voice crackled over the comms, carrying the kind of news that made Bryn's stomach flip like a pancake on a hangover morning. "Captain, got a slight wrinkle in our otherwise flawless plan," Jackson began, his tone dripping with irony. "Seems we've got company. Small alien skirmish vessel closing fast." Bryn swore under his breath, a poetic stream of invective honed by years of command. "Of course we do. We'd be lonely without uninvited guests," he muttered. "What do they want, an autograph?" "Judging by their approach vector, I'd say they are after more than an autograph," Enya interjected, her eyes glued to the screens. "They're charging weapons." "Great," Bryn said, the word stretched with dry amusement. "Let's roll out the welcome mat and pray they don't notice the holes in it." The bridge hummed with a tension that could slice through steel. Bryn knew the crew was counting on him to pull a rabbit out of a hat, or at the very least, avoid getting them all vaporized. He punched the comms. "Jackson, how's our miracle machine looking?" Jackson chuckled, though the sound was more resigned than jovial. "Slapped together a potential weapon design using that defunct energy core. It's untested, naturally. Might save us or it might turn us into cosmic confetti." "Sounds promising," Bryn replied with grim enthusiasm. "I love a good gamble when the alternative is death." "I'll take that as permission to fire it up," Jackson said, the decision already made. "Cross your fingers and maybe sacrifice a goat if you can find one." Bryn shook his head, the grin on his face a sardonic mask. "If this works, I'll name the first goat after you." The Resolute was no stranger to skirmishes, but this time felt different. The alien vessel bore down on them with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer, and Bryn couldn't shake the feeling that they were the nail. "Shields up," he barked, knowing full well they were as dependable as a politician's promise. "And let's try to look like a real fortress ship, shall we?" The bridge crew scrambled, the air thick with a cocktail of fear and determination. Bryn felt it too, that gnawing anxiety that came from knowing they were outgunned and outmatched, but refusing to back down all the same. The alien vessel opened fire, its shots slicing through the void with deadly precision. The Resolute's shields flared, struggling to absorb the impact. A shudder ran through the ship, an ominous reminder that their luck was on life support. "Jackson, whatever you're doing, do it faster," Bryn urged, gripping the armrests of his chair as if they held the universe's secrets. "Captain, I'm an engineer, not a miracle worker," Jackson retorted over the comms, his voice laced with the kind of dry humor that was practically his trademark. "But I'll do my damnedest." Another volley rocked the ship, and Bryn could almost hear the Resolute groan in protest. "Status report," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Shields are down to 50%, Enya replied, her tone clipped with urgency. "And falling." "Well, isn't that just peachy?" Bryn said, his mind racing through contingency plans that all ended with them as space dust. "Start devising a backup plan." As the alien vessel circled for another pass, Jackson worked furiously. His hands moved with practiced precision, connecting wires and recalibrating systems with the adeptness of a man long acquainted with impending doom. He glanced at the makeshift weapon, a cobbled-together monstrosity that might be their salvation or their end. "All right, you beautiful piece of junk," he murmured, hands moving like a conductor leading a symphony of chaos. "Let's see what you've got." The ship shuddered again, and Jackson grimaced as he rerouted power, risking it all on a gamble that might just pay off, or blow up in his face, literally. "Captain, I'm ready to give this a shot," Jackson said, the words weighted with both hope and trepidation. "Do it," Bryn replied, his command leaving no room for hesitation. They were out of options, and he'd be damned if they went down without a fight. Jackson activated the improvised weapon, holding his breath as energy surged through the ship's systems. For a heartbeat, time seemed to hold its breath with him. Then, with a roar of defiance, the weapon fired. A beam of incandescent energy lanced through the void, slamming into the alien vessel with the force of 1,000 suns. "Direct hit," Enya reported, a note of disbelief coloring her voice. "They're backing off." Bryn let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Good job, Jackson. Looks like we bought ourselves some time." But even as he spoke, the ship groaned, a sound that sent a shiver down Bryn's spine. The Resolute wasn't built for this kind of punishment, and she was letting them know. "Damage report," Bryn demanded, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Several systems are offline," Enya replied, her fingers dancing over the controls. "We're losing power in multiple sectors." "Of course we are," Bryn muttered, rubbing a hand over his face. "Why wouldn't we be?" Jackson's voice crackled over the comms, a lifeline through the static. "Captain, we've got damage to the energy core. It's unstable." Bryn grimaced, the weight of command sitting heavily on his shoulders. "Can you fix it?" "I'll try," Jackson replied, though the odds were stacked against him in a cosmic game of chance. "But it ain't gonna be pretty." Bryn nodded, even though Jackson couldn't see it. "Do what you can. We're not out of this yet." The Resolute limped through space, her hull scarred and systems flickering like a dying star. Bryn knew they were living on borrowed time, but he'd be damned if he didn't squeeze every drop of life out of it. "Keep monitoring for any more surprises," he ordered, casting a wary eye at the displays. "I don't want to be caught with our pants down." "Again, you got it, Captain," Enya replied, her voice resolute despite the odds. "We'll keep our eyes peeled." Bryn settled back in his chair, feeling the ship hum beneath him with a tenacity that mirrored his own. They were battered but unbowed, a ragtag crew held together by grit and gallows humor. "Let's see if we can make it out of this one without becoming a footnote in some alien history book," he said, the words a rallying cry in the face of insurmountable odds. Because as long as they drew breath, they'd keep fighting. It was the human way, stubborn, relentless, and just a little bit insane. Jackson worked tirelessly, his mind a whirlwind of calculations and improvisations. The energy core was a ticking time bomb, and he was the poor bastard tasked with defusing it. Sweat trickled down his face as he soldered connections, each touch a delicate negotiation with fate. "Come on, you finicky piece of scrap," he muttered, hands moving with the practiced ease of a man who'd long since made peace with the universe's twisted humor. The ship's lights flickered ominously, and Jackson swore under his breath. "Just hold together a little longer," he urged, as if wishing could bend the laws of physics. Back on the bridge, Bryn monitored the alien vessel, now keeping its distance like a cautious predator unsure if its prey would bite back. "What's the status on our uninvited guests?" he asked, his voice a calm counterpoint to the storm raging around them. "They're still watching us, but no signs of additional aggression," Enya replied, the relief in her voice tempered by caution. Bryn nodded, his mind already 3 steps ahead. "Good, let's keep them guessing." Jackson's voice cut through the static, a lifeline of grim determination. "Captain, I think I've stabilized the core for now. It's not a permanent fix, but it should hold." "Excellent work, Jackson," Bryn replied, his gratitude genuine. "Push comes to shove, we'll make do with duct tape and prayers." Jackson chuckled, the sound more weary than amused. "Seems to be our trademark." Bryn sat back, letting the tension ease from his muscles, if only for a moment. They'd bought themselves a reprieve, but the clock was still ticking and they were nowhere near safe. But for now, they were alive, and in this corner of the universe that counted for something. "Keep us steady, folks," Bryn ordered, his voice a steady anchor in the chaos. "We're not out of the woods, but we're still in the game." And with that, the Resolute continued her journey through the stars, a battered testament to human stubbornness and the relentless fight for survival in a universe that would just as soon see them dead. For now, it was enough. The Resolute drifted through space, looking a lot like a shopping cart that had been booted from the parking lot. Bryn Folly slouched in his command chair, rubbing the bridge of his nose as he watched the alien fleet materialize on the vid screen. They came in like a bad storm, ominous and numerous, blotting out the comforting pinpricks of far-off stars. "Perfect," Bryn muttered, sarcasm dripping from his words like oil from a leaky engine. "Looks like the neighborhood watch has arrived." Enya, never one to miss an opportunity for cynicism, glanced up from her console. "Maybe they just want to borrow a cup of sugar, Captain." "Maybe," Bryn replied, his tone suggesting he'd believe that the day he saw a pig fly the ship. "But I doubt they brought a casserole." The bridge crew was silent, eyes glued to their screens with the kind of focus usually reserved for bomb defusal and keeping toddlers out of trouble. The Resolute was a bucket of bolts, and now it faced a fleet that looked like it had been assembled from a How to Obliterate Planets for Dummies manual. The odds weren't just long, they were microscopic. Jackson Bryn called into the comms, his voice carrying more hope than he felt. "How's our Frankenstein weapon coming along?" "Still cooking, Captain," Jackson replied, sounding like a man juggling flaming chainsaws. "I've had easier times making breakfast." "Keep your pants on." "Pants are on, though I might need a new pair soon," Bryn said, scanning the bridge. Everyone looked tense. like a troop of acrobats waiting for their safety net to catch fire. "Focus, people," Bryn ordered, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in his gut, the one suggesting that they were all about to become space roadkill. "Let's give them a welcome they'll remember." As if on cue, the alien ships began their approach, weapon systems glowing ominously. Bryn figured they'd probably looked prettier from a distance, but up close, they were about as charming as a punch to the face. "Here they come," Enya announced, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Shields?" Bryn asked, knowing full well what the answer would be but asking anyway because hope dies hard. "Still at 50% and falling faster than my patience," Enya replied, fingers flying over her panel. "Of course," Bryn muttered, wondering if he was destined to spend his final moments complaining about technology. "Initiate evasive maneuvers." The Resolute lurched, a great metal beast trying to dance when it had long since forgotten the steps. The first volley from the alien fleet hammered into them, and the ship's innards screamed in protest, like a cantankerous old man begrudgingly waking up for his morning coffee. "Damage report." Bryn shouted, though his gut already told him it was going to be bad news. "Hull breaches in multiple sectors," Enya rattled off. "And we've lost comms with engineering." "Fantastic," Bryn replied, sarcasm coating his words like a thick layer of chocolate over a very bitter pill. "Any more good news?" Casualties reported. "Morale's sinking too," Enya added, her voice tight with the strain of maintaining professionalism in the face of doom. "Just when you think things can't get worse, they do," Bryn quipped, the humor in his voice dark and twisted, his last refuge against despair. "Jackson, I hope you've got some magic up your sleeve." The comms crackled to life, Jackson's voice a lifeline through the growing chaos. "Captain, I've got the weapon ready, but it's gonna need more juice than we have left. And we're running low on, well, everything." Bryn sighed, the weight of command pressing down like a lead blanket. "Options." Jackson hesitated, his voice carrying the hesitancy of a man who knew he was gambling with other people's lives. "We could reroute life support power. But minor downside, everyone suffocates." "Cheerful prospect," Bryn said, considering. "But if we're gonna suffocate anyway, might as well do it with a fighting chance." The bridge was silent, the crew watching him with that mix of desperate hope and resignation that comes from placing your fate in the hands of a man who was mostly making it up as he went along. "Do it," Bryn commanded, his tone brooking no argument. "We're not going down without a damn good fireworks show." "Roger that," Jackson replied, his voice steady even as he prepared to dance on the edge of a knife. On the bridge, the atmosphere was tense, filled with the unspoken acknowledgement that they were on borrowed time. Bryn looked around at his crew, the people who had somehow become his dysfunctional family. They were scared, yes, but defiance burned in their eyes like a stubborn flame. "Let's give them hell," Bryn said, the words a challenge to the universe which seemed intent on snuffing them out. The lights flickered, and Bryn felt the air grow thin, a subtle reminder that they were playing fast and loose with survival. He could almost hear the ship's systems keening as Jackson redirected power, throwing everything into the makeshift weapon that might be their last hope. "Ready to fire, Captain," Jackson reported, and Bryn could practically see him down in engineering, hands poised over a control panel like some ancient wizard casting a final spell. "Fire," Bryn ordered, the single word carrying the weight of 1,000 decisions. The ship shuddered as the weapon discharged, a bolt of energy lancing out across the void, targeting the lead alien vessel. Time seemed to stretch, every second a small eternity, as they watched to see if their gamble would pay off. A moment later, the alien ship erupted in a blaze of light, shattering into 1,000 pieces. The fleet hesitated, shocked, like a bully who'd just been punched in the nose by the scrawny kid they were picking on. "Direct hit," Enya breathed, disbelief coloring her voice. "Looks like they didn't see that coming." Bryn allowed himself a grim smile. "Well, that's one down. Only 100 to go." The alien fleet regrouped, and Bryn felt the fleeting satisfaction of their minor victory evaporate like mist in the morning sun. "Jackson, can we do that again?" Not unless you've got a spare energy core tucked under your chair, Jackson replied, his tone frustrated but determined. We're tapped out. Figures, Bryn said, contemplating the dwindling options. Guess we're back to being the proverbial sitting ducks. The alien ships moved in, sensing weakness or perhaps just eager to finish what they'd started. Bryn felt the weight of command heavier than before, the burden of deciding whether to fight to the bitter end or consider surrender to save the lives of those left. Captain, Enya said softly, as if reading his thoughts, what are your orders? Bryn hesitated, torn between the desperate urge to fight and the cold logic of survival. Hold position, he ordered finally, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Let's not give up just yet. The ship quivered under another barrage, systems struggling to hold together, like an old soldier refusing to lay down arms. Bryn watched the displays, the alien fleet closing in, his mind racing through last-ditch plans that seemed increasingly futile. Options? He asked, though the question was more rhetorical than hopeful. Not many, Enya replied, her voice carrying the weariness of someone who's faced one too many impossible odds. We're out of tricks. Bryn nodded, more to himself than anyone else. Prepare to open a comm channel to the fleet, he said, resignation creeping into his tone like an unwelcome guest. Captain? Enya asked, surprise evident though she quickly masked it with professionalism. We might have to negotiate, Bryn said, the words painful to say but necessary. No point in all of us dying if there's another way. The crew exchanged glances, a mixture of fear, anger, and reluctant acceptance. They'd fought tooth and nail, but sometimes the universe just didn't want to let you win. Channel open, Captain, Enya reported, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her eyes. Bryn straightened in his chair, every instinct screaming against the decision, but his mind knowing it was time to consider the lives under his command. This is Captain Bryn Folly of the Resolute, he began, his voice carrying the hard-won authority of a man caught between courage and pragmatism. We request a ceasefire. The seconds ticked by, each one a small eternity as they waited for a response. Bryn's fingers drummed an impatient dirge on the arm of his chair, his mind racing through contingencies in case the aliens decided negotiate translated to fire at will. Finally, a harsh voice crackled over the comms, the alien tongue a jumble of guttural sounds that Enya's console did its best to translate into something resembling galactic common. You have something to offer. Bryn hesitated, knowing full well he had little more than a battered ship and a crew with more guts than sense. A truce, he said finally, every word carefully chosen. We're willing to talk terms. The alien's reply was slow, deliberate, like a cat toying with a mouse that might yet still have a bite. Stand by, it said, and Bryn felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, they wouldn't have to die today. The line went silent and Bryn glanced around the bridge, taking in the faces of his crew. They were scared, battered, but unbroken. Whatever happened next, they'd face it together. Keep your fingers crossed, Bryn said, the words a prayer to the universe that they'd find a way out of this mess. And hope they've got a soft spot for underdogs. The bridge crew nodded, the resolve in their eyes echoing Bryn's own. They were still in the fight, for better or worse, and they'd see it through to the end. Because as long as they drew breath, there was a chance. And sometimes, a chance was all you needed. The Resolute groaned under another alien volley, the ship systems rattling in a way that could only be described as hopelessly optimistic. Captain Bryn Folly had long since accepted that if the universe was a fair place, he'd be somewhere sipping a cocktail, not teetering on the edge of extinction. Down in the engineering guts of the Resolute, Jackson Thorne was elbow-deep in a tangle of wires and blinking lights. If he was some kind of space wizard, then this was his cauldron, bubbling ominously with the promise of either salvation or catastrophe. His datapad flickered, the screen a swirling mosaic of static and half-baked ideas. What's the status, Jackson? Bryn's voice crackled over the comms, the captain's tone suggesting he was about one more bad news report away from a nervous breakdown. Jackson, smeared with grime and what might have been oil or just yesterday's stew, grinned into the comms. "Well, Captain, unless you fancy doing a spacewalk in your skivvies, we're fresh out of miracles. But I did find something interesting." "In that junkyard you call an engineering bay?" Bryn asked, the sarcasm as thick as ever. "Please enlighten me." Jackson held up a tattered old engineering manual, pages yellowed with age. "It's an ancient guide to weapons systems. It might as well be a children's coloring book for all the good it'll do, but there are some notes in the margins." "Looks like some old engineer had a few bright ideas. And you think you can make something of it," Bryn replied, the glimmer of hope in his voice barely masked by skepticism. "I've got a knack for turning wild guesses into slightly less wild guesses, Captain. And this might just be the kind of half-baked scheme we need." The bridge crew listened with bated breath, a collective tension binding them tighter than any official protocol. Bryn gave a nod that Jackson couldn't see but seemed to feel. "Then go on, make it happen. We've got a date with destiny, and I'd rather not show up empty-handed." Jackson set to work, fingers flying over the controls like a maestro conducting a symphony of chaos. He pulled up schematics, recalibrated the energy flows, and muttered curses that would have made even the most hardened sailor blush. If there was one thing he was certain of, it was that this ship, his ship, had a nasty habit of testing his patience every damn step of the way. Meanwhile, Enya watched the drama unfold from her station, the bridge a hive of controlled panic. She turned to Bryn. "You trust Jackson?" Bryn shrugged, a gesture that conveyed more than words ever could. "He's like a cat that always lands on its feet. And right now, he's the closest thing we've got to a miracle worker." "Yeah, well," Enya replied, twisting her lips into a wry smile. "Let's hope this cat's got a few lives left." Below decks, Jackson was in his element, or at least, as close to his element as one could get when the ship was on the verge of catastrophic failure. He wiped a bead of sweat from his brow and adjusted the settings on the makeshift weapon. It wasn't pretty, but beauty was the least of their concerns right now. "Listen up, crew," Bryn's voice boomed over the intercom, carrying a mix of authority and grim humor. "We've got a plan. Jackson's cooking up something special in engineering, so hang tight and try not to breathe too much. We might need that oxygen." Laughter, the kind that comes when there's nothing left to lose, echoed through the corridors. It was the laughter of people who knew the odds and were flipping them the bird anyway. Enya glanced over at Bryn, who was staring at the display with an intensity that suggested he was either deeply focused or trying to will the aliens out of existence through sheer force of will. "You really think we can pull this off?" she asked, her voice tinged with doubt. "If you'd asked me that yesterday, I'd have said no," Bryn replied, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "But today, hell, why not? We're too stubborn to die." Back in engineering, Jackson was soldering wires together with the precision of a drunk surgeon. He tapped the datapad, the screen stabilizing just long enough to display the weapon systems coming online. "Captain," he announced, pride in his voice, "we've got ourselves a Frankenstein special, ready to lure these bastards into one hell of a surprise." Bryn nodded, though his heart pounded like a percussionist gone mad. "All right, people, you heard the man. Let's set the bait and see if we can't lure these alien sons of bitches into our little trap." The plan was simple, at least on paper. Use the Resolute's remaining energy to power Jackson's makeshift weapon, draw the alien fleet into a vulnerable position, and then, hopefully, blow them to kingdom come. It was risky, audacious, and had all the hallmarks of a bad idea brewed over too much whiskey. "Enya, get the coordinates ready," Bryn ordered, his voice a steady anchor amidst the chaos. "Let's lead them on a merry chase." "Coordinates set, Captain," Enya replied, her fingers dancing over the controls with practiced ease. "And for what it's worth, I think this might just work." "That makes one of us," Bryn quipped, but there was a glint in his eye that belied his words. "Jackson, you ready?" "Born ready, Cap," Jackson replied, his voice steady despite the madness around him. "All right," Bryn said, taking a deep breath. "Let's do this. On my mark. The Resolute shuddered as it banked hard, engines roaring in protest but complying nonetheless. The alien fleet followed, a menacing wall of ships closing in, their intentions clear as the cold void of space. "Captain, they're biting," Enya reported, her voice tense. "Let's reel them in." "Steady," Bryn instructed, watching the displays with hawk-like focus. This was the moment, the culmination of desperation and ingenuity. "Now," Bryn commanded, and Jackson hit the switch, his contraption whirring to life with a sound that could only be described as terrifyingly hopeful. The improvised weapon spewed energy, a searing bolt that sliced through the blackness, aimed straight at the heart of the alien formation. The aliens, caught off guard by the sudden assault, scrambled to evade, their formation a chaotic dance of panic. "Direct hit," Enya shouted, triumph in her voice. "We've got them on the run." "Well, I'll be damned," Bryn said, a grin splitting his face. "Looks like we've still got some fight left in us." As the alien fleet reeled from the surprise attack, the crew of the Resolute felt a surge of adrenaline, the kind that comes when you realize you might just pull off the impossible. They were still outnumbered, still outgunned, but in that moment it didn't matter. "Jackson, think you can give us an encore?" Bryn asked, his voice light with renewed hope. "If the ship doesn't blow up first, sure," Jackson replied, already tweaking settings and recalibrating for another shot. "Give me a few and I'll see what I can do." The crew moved with a new urgency, their previous despair replaced by a sense of possibility. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep going. "All right, people," Bryn said, his voice carrying the command of a man who'd faced death and laughed in its face. "Let's show them what we're made of. Keep the pressure on and don't let up. We're not done yet." As the battle raged on, the crew of the Resolute found themselves united in their defiance, a ragtag band of misfits taking a stand against the odds. They were battered and bruised, but they were far from beaten. In the midst of chaos, a strange calm settled over Bryn. Maybe they'd survive, maybe they wouldn't, but at least they'd go down fighting. And in the grand scheme of things, that was all he could ask for. "You know," Jackson's voice crackled over the comms, interrupting Bryn's thoughts, "when this is all over, I'm gonna need a vacation. Preferably somewhere without homicidal aliens." Bryn chuckled, the sound a rare comfort amidst the insanity. "You and me both, Jackson. You and me both." The Resolute continued its defiant stand, a testament not to the strength of its metal hull, but to the steel in its crew's resolve. Because in a universe that seemed determined to crush them, they'd found the strength to fight back, and they weren't about to give up without one hell of a show. As the aliens regrouped, Bryn knew they were far from out of danger, but for the first time in a long time, he felt something akin to hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd see another sunrise. And if they didn't, well, at least they'd give the universe something to remember them by. Jackson Thorne was in full mad scientist mode, a state of being where caffeine had replaced blood and optimism had been forcibly evicted. He stared at his Frankenstein creation, the hastily cobbled-together weapon that was supposed to save their sorry hides. If it worked, they'd be heroes. If it didn't, well, they wouldn't be around to hear the laughter. "All right, dear monstrosity," Jackson muttered to the tangle of wires and circuits. "It's time to make your dad proud." Down in the bowels of the Resolute, surrounded by the comforting hum of machinery, Jackson was a man possessed. The engineering bay looked like a tornado had ravaged a scrapyard, but chaos was his canvas and he was painting a masterpiece, or at least a passable forgery. "Jackson," Bryn's voice crackled over the intercom, breaking the symphony of clattering tools and muttered curses. "How's it looking down there?" "Precarious, Captain. Like a house of cards built on a jet engine, but it's as ready as it'll ever be," Jackson replied, his voice carrying the laconic humor of someone who knew just how close to the edge they were tiptoeing. "Good enough for me," Bryn answered, his tone a mix of gallows humor and steely resolve. "We're about to hit the point of no return, ready to do some damage." "Ready as I'll ever be," Jackson said, flipping switches with a flourish that would have made a stage magician proud. "Weapons are hot, Captain. Let's light this candle." Up on the bridge, Bryn glanced at Enya, who was keeping a close eye on the readouts. The alien fleet loomed large on the vidscreen, a wall of ominous blotches that promised nothing good. "You heard the man," Bryn said. "Time to roll the dice." Enya smirked, her fingers dancing over the controls with practiced ease. "And here I thought today was going to be boring. Coordinates set, Captain. Ready to make some noise." Bryn nodded, his fingers tapping a nervous rhythm on the armrest of his chair. "All right, folks. Let's give them a show they won't forget. On my mark." The Resolute shuddered as Jackson's creation came to life, drawing power from the ship's core like a thirsty man at a bar. Lights flickered, the hum of background systems dipped, and for a moment it felt like standing on the edge of a precipice. "Now!" Bryn yelled, and Jackson's weapon unleashed its fury. A blinding lance of energy shot forth, cutting through the void with all the subtlety of an enraged god. It was raw power, untamed and barely controlled, and it plowed into the heart of the alien fleet with devastating results. The alien ships convulsed, their elegant formations shattered by the unexpected onslaught. One by one they erupted in spectacular blossoms of fire and debris, their carefully orchestrated advance turned into a mad scramble for survival. "Direct hit on the flagship," Enya shouted, her voice carrying a rare note of triumph. "Commander Zyler's ship is toast. And that's one less bastard to worry about," Bryn said, satisfaction evident in his voice. The bridge erupted in cheers, the sound of relief mingling with the electric drone of systems coming back online. It wasn't a total victory, but it was a hell of a blow, and in this game of life and death, every hit counted. Jackson leaned back in his chair, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. "Well, Captain," he said, grinning like a madman, "it didn't blow us up, and it sure as hell blew them up." "I'd call that a win. Couldn't have done it without you, Jackson," Bryn replied, his voice carrying the warmth of genuine appreciation. "Now let's see if we can't press that advantage." As the remnants of the alien fleet began to retreat, licking their wounds and regrouping, Bryn felt a surge of hope, a rare and dangerous thing in these dark times. But hope, like all emotions, was a double-edged sword, and he knew better than to trust it blindly. "Enya, keep us moving," Bryn ordered, his eyes never leaving the vidscreen. "Let's not give them a chance to catch their breath." "On it, Captain," Enya replied, adjusting their course with the practiced ease of someone who'd danced this dance more times than she'd care to admit. "Jackson," Bryn said, turning his attention back to engineering, "think you can give us another shot if they decide to come back for round 2? Jackson's laughter echoed over the comms, a sound brimming with equal parts madness and mirth. "If the old girl holds together, sure. I'll just need a bit of time to kick it back into shape." "Time will try to buy you," Bryn promised, though he knew that promises made in the heat of battle were as fragile as spun glass. The Resolute continued its dance, a battered but unbowed vessel threading its way through the stars. In their wake, the alien fleet reeled, their confidence shattered by the audacity of human desperation. Bryn knew they'd earned a reprieve, but he also knew it wouldn't last. The universe in its infinite cruelty would see to that. But for now, they had something to hold onto, a flicker of defiance that refused to be snuffed out. "Captain," Enya said, her voice cutting through his reverie, "looks like they're pulling back. We might have scared them off for the time being." "Good," Bryn replied, though he remained vigilant. "Let's use the time to regroup and figure out our next move." In the background, Jackson's voice crackled over the comms, a sardonic undertone threading through his words. "Just another day in paradise, eh?" Bryn chuckled, the sound a balm to the tension that had coiled like a spring within him. "If this is paradise, I'd hate to see what hell looks like." As the crew set about assessing damages and preparing for whatever came next, Bryn allowed himself a moment to breathe. They were blooded, but they weren't beaten. Not yet. "Enya," he said, his voice steady and sure, "keep an eye on those scanners. I want to know if they so much as twitch in our direction." "You got it, Captain," she replied, her tone all business, though a trace of humor lingered in her eyes. "I'm on it like stink on a skunk." Bryn turned his attention back to the vid screen, the remnants of the alien fleet growing smaller as they retreated into the distance. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the first time in what felt like forever, they had the upper hand. "They'll be held to pay for this," he mused aloud, a wry grin playing across his lips. "Let's just hope we're not the ones footing the bill," Annie quipped, her words a reminder of the precarious line they walked. As the bridge settled into a more relaxed rhythm, the adrenaline ebbing away to reveal exhaustion and the lingering ache of stress, Bryn allowed himself a moment of reflection. They'd pulled off the impossible, and in doing so, reminded themselves of what it meant to be human, to fight, to survive, and to laugh in the face of doom. It was a lesson hard-earned and well-learned, and one they'd carry with them into whatever awaited them next. "All right," Bryn said, his voice carrying the weight of command tempered by the warmth of camaraderie. "Let's get to work. We've still got a ship to run and a universe to defy." As the crew of the Resolute set about their tasks, they did so with the knowledge that they'd faced the abyss and returned, not unscathed but unbroken. And in a universe that seemed determined to grind them into dust, that was a victory all its own. Jackson, down in the engineering bay, surveyed the organized chaos that was his domain. He felt a strange sense of peace amidst the clamor, a calm born of having faced the worst and come out the other side. "Hey, Captain," he called over the comms, a grin audible in his voice. "I'd say drinks are on you when this is all over." Bryn's laughter echoed back, a sound that held a promise of better days. "You're on, Jackson. You're on." And thus the Resolute pressed onward, a testament not to the metal that comprised it but to the spirit that drove it, an indomitable force that refused to be cowed by the vast, uncaring universe. In the end, they were more than just survivors. They were a crew, a family bound not by blood but by the shared struggle and the unyielding will to keep fighting. And that, Bryn thought, was worth more than any victory. The Resolute's bridge was a scene straight out of a half-remembered hangover, a mix of scattered datapads, blinking lights, and the unmistakable scent of burnt circuits. Captain Bryn folly eyed the chaos with the warped pride of a captain who had steered his ship through hell and back. The crew had pulled off the kind of stunt you only hear about in drunken bar tales or those cheesy holodramas where the underdogs always win. But this wasn't fiction, and the bruises on their egos and bodies were proof enough. Bryn stretched in his chair, joints popping like faulty pistons. "Well, crew," he said, his voice as dry as a Martian summer, "I'd say we've earned ourselves a moment of peace, but don't get too comfy. Knowing our luck, it'll last about as long as a politician's promise." Enya chuckled from her station, eyes glued to the monitors as if daring them to show anything other than safety. "Maybe we should invest in a crew survival fund," she quipped, fingers dancing over the controls. "Might end up richer than the whole galactic treasury at this rate." Down in the engineering bay, Jackson Thorne was elbow-deep in wires and half-baked machinery, his hands moving with a precision that belied the chaotic state of the bay. Jackson had the air of a man you wouldn't trust with your lunch money, let alone the fate of a ship, but trust him they did. Necessity, after all, was the universe's cruelest matchmaker. "How's it going down there, Jackson?" Bryn's voice crackled over the comms, cutting through the background noise of sparking tools and low-grade curses. Jackson grinned, though there was an edge to it, the kind of grin that said, "We're not dead yet, but don't jinx it." "Oh, just another day at the office. Fixing up this tin can like it's a long-lost lover." "But hey, at least she's not trying to kill us today." "That's the spirit," Bryn replied, the sarcasm in his voice a comforting constant. "Think you can patch her up for another round of let's not explode today?" "Captain, I'm insulted," Jackson shot back, his tone mock-serious. "I'd say we've got a solid 70-30 chance of survival next time, assuming nothing else goes wrong." 70-30, huh? "Those are practically vacation odds for us," Enya chimed in, trying to ease the tension with humor that was as dark as the space surrounding them. They all laughed, an uneasy but shared release of tension, before Bryn's voice took on a more serious note. "All right," Bring us up to speed on repairs. I want this ship ready to dance if those aliens decide they want an encore. Jackson surveyed his handiwork with the eye of a craftsman who'd been given the roughest of materials. We'll need to reinforce the shields, he said, ticking items off on his fingers as if counting sins. And the weapon systems. Well, let's just say they're about as reliable as a gambler promising this is the last bet. Bryn winced, the analogy hitting too close to home. Understood. Do what you can and we'll see about scavenging some parts at the next stop. Enya, any readings on potential salvage ops nearby? Scanning, she replied, eyes flitting over the screens. There's a derelict not far from here. Looks like it was part of an old mining outpost. Might have some spare parts if the universe decides to cut us a break. Perfect, Bryn said, his mind already whirring through the logistics. Jackson, think you can make something out of mining scraps? Jackson snorted, a sound that somehow conveyed both amusement and disdain. Captain, I'm not a miracle worker, but I'm the next best thing. Just get me there and I'll make it happen. Bryn nodded, the edges of his mouth curling into a grim smile. All right then, let's get to work. Enya, plot a course and get us moving. Enya's hands moved with practiced efficiency, the kind that came from countless ayors at the helm. Course set, Captain. Engaging engines now. The Resolute shuddered as it powered forward, the engines an all too familiar rumble beneath their feet. It wasn't the smoothest ride, more like a drunk trying to tiptoe across a tightrope, but it was theirs and it would have to do. As they traveled, Bryn couldn't help but reflect on the irony of their situation. Here they were, supposed bastions of human ingenuity, scavenging for parts like spaceborne magpies. Still, it was a living, more or less. You know, Bryn mused aloud, his voice cutting through the steady hum of the bridge, we might be the universe's punching bag, but we're not out of the fight yet. Enya leaned back, studying him with a mix of amusement and respect. That's what I like about you, Captain. You make even losing sound like it's worth celebrating. Bryn shrugged, a gesture half apology and half defiance. Well, who knows? Maybe one day it'll be true. It wasn't long before they reached the derelict, a hulking mass of metal that drifted through space like an unwanted memory. The Resolute sidled up alongside it, and Bryn gave the order to begin salvage operations. All right, Jackson, Bryn said, the comm crackling with static. Your playground awaits. Try not to blow it up before we can loot it. Jackson's laughter echoed back, a sound that somehow made the prospect of imminent danger seem slightly less daunting. No promises, Captain, but I'll see what treasures this rust bucket holds. As Jackson and his team began their salvage work, Bryn surveyed the bridge, the quiet murmur of activity a comforting backdrop. He knew that this victory, if you could call it that, was only a small reprieve in the grand scheme of things. The universe was still out there, plotting and scheming, and they'd be damned if they let it get the better of them again. Hours passed, the monotony punctuated by the occasional burst of static over the comms. Jackson's voice was a constant presence, updating them on progress with a mix of technical jargon and irreverent humor that somehow made the mind-numbing task of scavenging feel almost heroic. Captain, Jackson's voice crackled through the speakers, cutting through the silence like a lifeline. We've hit the jackpot. Found some shield generators that should fit our old girl like a glove. Or at least like a glove with a few holes in it. Bryn allowed himself a small smile, the kind that felt more natural than the forced optimism he usually wore. Good work, Jackson. Let's get them installed and see if we can't improve our odds a little. Will do, Captain, Jackson replied, and Bryn could almost hear the gears turning in his mind, the excitement of a challenge met and bested. As the crew worked to integrate their findings into the Resolute systems, Bryn found himself reflecting on the day's events. They'd faced down an alien fleet, survived against the odds, and even managed to score a victory of sorts. It was the kind of tale that would make for a hell of a story if they lived to tell it. Captain, Enya called out, her voice breaking his reverie. Looks like the aliens are keeping their distance for now. I think we scared them off, at least for the time being. Good, Bryn said, though he knew better than to relax completely. Let's use the time wisely. I have a feeling this isn't the last we'll see of them. As the crew of the Resolute continued their work, the ship hummed with a new sense of purpose. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about defying the universe and all it could throw at them. And that, Bryn thought, was a cause worth fighting for. "Jackson," Bryn said, opening the comm channel to the engineering bay once more. "How are things looking with the upgrades?" Jackson's voice came back, brimming with the kind of confidence that was born from necessity. "We're just about done, Captain. She might still look like a pile of junk, but she's our pile of junk, ready to kick some ass when needed." "That's what I like to hear," Bryn replied, the weight of command tempered by camaraderie. "Let's get her buttoned up and ready to roll." As they finished the last of the repairs and prepped the Resolute for whatever came next, Bryn allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. They'd faced the worst the universe could throw at them and lived to tell the tale, or at least the next chapter of it. It wasn't much, but it was enough. "All right, crew," Bryn said, rising from his chair to address them all. "We've got a ship that's a little less dead, a crew that's a little more alive, and a universe that's probably furious about both. Let's keep it that way." As laughter and cheers filled the bridge, Bryn felt the tight coil of tension in his chest begin to unwind, replaced by a flicker of hope. It was a dangerous emotion, but one he couldn't quite bring himself to extinguish. In the end, they were more than just a crew on a mission. They were a family, bound together by the trials they'd faced and the battles yet to come. And Bryn knew that as long as they stood together, they'd find a way to keep defying the odds. Jackson's voice came over the comms one last time, a familiar and welcome intrusion. "Captain, what do you say we celebrate this little victory with something stronger than recycled air?" Bryn laughed, a sound that echoed with the promise of better days. "You're on, Jackson." "Drinks are on me." As the Resolute powered away from the derelict, its engines a steady thrum beneath their feet, they looked forward not just to survival, but to the next challenge, the next adventure that lay beyond the stars. In a universe where hope was a rare commodity and victory even rarer, they had both, at least for now. And that, Bryn thought, was worth more than any treasure.